Hi, my name is Jordan Korfman, and this is my presentation on my journal findings. Part 1 of the book covers chapters 1 through 3. These chapters are an introductory portion of the book, beginning by examining how research methods are critical within criminal justice. Chapter 2 specifically examines fundamental features such as theory, data collection, and data analysis. This chapter also looks into the why people use research within this field. Chapter 3 examined ethics within how criminal justice is researched and how it's shaped. Part 2 of this text covers chapters 4 through 7. Chapter 4 specifically dives into the deeper aspects of research, such as finding validity and the notion of cause and effect within a research study. Chapter 5 deals with the idea of concepts, operationalization, and the importance of precision within research. Chapter 6 examines measuring crime data, and Chapter 7 looks into the experimental approaches and the aspects within criminal justice research. Part 3 covers chapters 8 through 12. Part 3 looks directly at modes of observation. Chapter 8 examines sampling within a research study. Chapter 9 examined survey research. Chapter 10 looked into qualitative interviewing. Chapter 11 examined fieldwork and observation, and Chapter 12 looked into agency records, content analysis, and secondary data within a research study. This part of this book really looks into the nitty and gritty into a research study and what all goes into it. Part 4 of this book covered chapters 13 and 14. Chapters 13 examined problem analysis and evaluation research, and Chapter 14 covered the idea of interpreting data found within a research study. This section of the book covers towards the end of a research study, gathering your conclusions and things like that. The first journal that I looked into a research study that examined if African American individuals get pulled over more than other people by police officers. This study used quantitative data to determine what percentages of what race were being pulled over. This also covered police discretion and whether or not police interactions should be highly regulated or not. I personally believe that the ideas presented could potentially cause more harm than good. This is due to the fact that police discretion often leaves a lot not up for review. And I think that many decisions need to be looked at by more than just one participating party when it comes to criminal justice. I also think that a lot of the research found did show that minorities were being pulled over more than other people, which this might have been the root cause of. In the next journal, a study was presented that dove into the idea of ethics within research. I believe that it was found that many ethical complications can often arise within the field of research, and also a lot of pros and cons were established in setting ethical boundaries. I think that staff behavior was definitely a huge ethical issue within this study. The researchers spent a lot of time with the state troopers, and this led to them hearing a lot of private conversations that these troopers probably would not want the public to hear. The researchers found out that many driving infractions are often overlooked, along with the troopers making a lot of inappropriate comments about race and sex. I found it to be very interesting that in this study, the researchers combated this issue by deleting the troopers' badge numbers and focused only on the research developed and the data provided to help eliminate this as an ethical issue. I think that when it comes to setting ethical boundaries between a researcher and the study, some pros and cons could be found. Some cons are that the researcher might not be able to get the most reliable information out of their research if they put too strict of boundaries in place. However, a pro of putting these boundaries is that it might help prevent biases or moral obligations from being applied to the situation. I think this can be a very difficult task to deal with within research, but that a healthy balance has to be found, and depending on the situation, that allows the researchers to have a good grasp, but also not become too personally involved for the research. The next study that we looked into followed a New Jersey Turnpike study. This study looked at several units of analysis, such as traffic stops, small area segment, station, and county. Different data sets were implemented using typologies and longitudinal studies. These studies examined certain group experiences with court, delinquency, and other such issues. This study also took into account time, and they did this to see how statistics would vary. Personally, I would say that the researchers did do a good job in this study at identifying all the variables that could affect discriminatory behavior. It took into consideration the amount of traffic stops and the variables within these traffic stops. And then in conclusion of this study, it kind of was revealed that in certain areas, more traffic stops are performed on minorities than in other areas. This data also took into consideration 5 different factors along with different units of analysis, which may have led to their information being more well-based and reliable. The next study, researchers examined police records and also used equipment such as radars and looked at self-reported data to examine how many speeding tickets were issued. Through using these things, researchers were able to see who was pulled over and also see how many people are typically speeding down a certain road. I believe that this study had its pros and cons as well. I think that using things such as the insider's POV in this research study did help reveal a lot to the researchers about who's actually breaking the laws, who's actually speeding, versus how many people are pulled over for things like this. However, the study also showed how much is left up to an officer to decide, and how little is known about what causes them to pull an individual over, which I think does leave a lot of room for racial profiling. The next study looked into differences of research studies and techniques. This examined between 2 different specific research studies in different areas. One study used random selection, where the other used a much larger sampling frame, which was a nationwide compilation. I believe that there were pros and cons to each study, but also some techniques that might have been inappropriate. These studies reviewed a New Jersey study to one in Pennsylvania, and there were definitely stark differences. For example, in New Jersey, they selected random individuals that were all entering the same toll. In the other study, however, they used a much larger sampling frame that used data and compiled an estimate nationwide to get these kinds of numbers and results. I think there are pros and cons to both of these methods. For example, pulling from the toll road does help apply a random selection method, which might help with bias issues. However, this group is very small, and unlike the other study with the national estimate, it might not have been quite as effective. But also, the larger sampling frame doesn't show the exact same results because of how large it was. Personally, I think that some of the methods they used within this study were unethical or inappropriate. For example, they offered the individuals money in an envelope to take their survey, which I think might have been inappropriate, and also a lot of the survey asked questions about race and gender, which could potentially seem to be a little bit of a racial profiling issue. However, I do understand that understanding what percentage of races come through might help in understanding racial profiling, and that by stopping every 3rd car in this study, it did help with the randomization and could possibly give the researcher an understanding as to why. A theme that is common throughout all of these different research studies is police discretion. Police discretion is the freedom of allowing officers to use their judgment to make decisions rather than following strict laws or protocols during their shift on duty. Upon viewing these excerpts from the text, I have personally come to the conclusion that in cases dealing with discrimination, police discretion often causes more harm than good. Many of these studies found that minorities do get pulled over more often, and I feel like allowing police to pull over people for whatever reason they seem fit often leads to discriminatory practices taking place. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.